Hello my friends, I hope you're doing well today. Welcome back to our ProRevenge channel, where many of you come to get your daily dose of satisfaction by hearing stories of people getting what they deserve. In today's episode, you'll hear 4 stories. The first is how OP's friend took down a timeshare scam. The second story explains why you should never pick on the quiet kids at school. I hope you stay for the stories today, and make sure to hit that subscribe button for more in the future. This story is titled, Costing a Timeshare Scam All Their Sales and Making $5,000 Doing It. This is the story of how a friend of mine dismantled a timeshare scam a few years back and came out on top. For some background, my friend is a big guy, about 6 feet 3 inches tall and 250 pounds, a no-nonsense military NCO. He enjoys his drinks and loves to have a good time when he's off duty. We'll call him JB. One day he got one of those win a free week-long cruise, all expenses paid phone calls. He decided to look into it because, why not? He called the number back and spoke to a lady who explained how the cruise worked. It sounded too good to be true, so he asked her, "Is there some sort of timeshare deal or other strings attached?" She assured him there was no timeshare involved. Intrigued, he signed up for the cruise, scheduled for a few months later during a block of leave. Here's where the revenge comes in. To claim the cruise, JB and his wife had to arrive a day early at a hotel near the port where the cruise was departing. The room was already paid for as part of the cruise package. They checked in, and the front desk concierge asked if they'd like to upgrade to the VIP package for $20, which included free drinks at the hotel bar. Of course, JB took the upgrade and headed to the bar. He's a social drinker, and after a few drinks he started chatting with the other bar patrons. He learned they were also there for the cruise and that there was a mandatory presentation the next morning everyone had to attend. JB started to smell a rat. This sounded suspiciously like a timeshare scam. He wasn't having any of it. Feeling bold from the free drinks, he rallied about 30 cruise-goers around him. He climbed onto a table and delivered a William Wallace-style speech about how they didn't have to fall for these timeshare scam artists. Within minutes, he'd whipped the crowd into a frenzy and convinced everyone not to buy into whatever the presentation was selling. Sure enough, the next morning, everyone showed up to the presentation to claim their cruise tickets, which they were told would be given out at the end. JB, still enjoying the free drinks because he was on leave, went into Braveheart mode again. He got loud, calling out the scam and reminding everyone that he was explicitly told there was no timeshare attached to the cruise. The timeshare staff quickly realized JB was bad for business. They ushered him into a side room to try to calm him down. One of the staff members said, "Sir, this is a mandatory presentation. We cannot give you a ticket for the cruise unless you attend." JB fired back, "You all specifically said there was no timeshare involved in the cruise." The staff member responded, "Sir, we have all of our calls recorded, and it's very clearly outlined that you need to listen to the presentation before getting the tickets." JB, undeterred, said, "Good. I love that the calls are recorded. Let's pull up my recording and show me when they said that." At this point, a large, security-looking guy, clearly part of the timeshare company, stepped in to intervene as JB grew louder and more agitated. The security guy tried to calm him down, but JB was riled up and wasn't taking it from anyone. It became clear they couldn't let JB into the presentation or he'd ruin everything. The director of the program pulled JB into his office and admitted that after listening to JB's call, he was right. The lady had said there was no timeshare involved. The director explained that they couldn't print his ticket until 12:30 p.m. when the presentation was scheduled to end because the company locked the tickets to force attendance. He offered JB a deal: come back at 12:30 p.m. for the tickets, and they'd upgrade him to premium for free if he stayed away from the presentation. Too easy. JB did exactly that and headed to the cruise. The premium upgrade gave him the best cabin on the ship, with free drinks and all sorts of awesome perks, including $5,000 credited to his account. Meanwhile, everyone else who sat through the timeshare presentation nearly missed the cruise because it ran too long. Not a single person bought a timeshare, despite the presenters' hours-long efforts to convince them. In the end, the company gave up and handed out the tickets in defeat. They made $0 in sales and lost another $5,000 to JB's free premium upgrades. I've never had any personal experiences with being pressured to buy timeshares, but I've heard stories. Last year I was at a resort in Cancun, and one of the big scams everyone was warned about was people trying to sell timeshares and fake silver bars. It seems like the word timeshare is just surrounded by so much negativity. Has anyone out there actually had a good experience with timeshares? I'd love to hear about it. This story is titled, Never Egg the Quiet Kid's House. Bad Things Happen. I spent my high school years in a small town in Wisconsin, with only a few stoplights and where everyone knew everyone. If you messed up or did something embarrassing, the whole town knew about it within hours, sometimes sooner. I had a small circle of friends and a bunch of acquaintances I hung out with from time to time. One of them is the center of this story. He was a pretty good guy, and we'll call him Ted for this story. The problem, of course, was that Ted was your typical high school outcast. He wasn't athletic, he played video games at a time when gamers were considered nerds or geeks, and he was the skinny kid with glasses, which made him an easy target for bullies. I've always been a gamer, so Ted and I got along fine. I was slightly more athletic and played football, so I could at least keep some of the guys off his back. But there was nothing I could do about the hockey guys. It was a Saturday, and we were at the bowling alley with a couple of mutual friends. Everything was going well until several members of the hockey team walked in and, of course, got put in the lane just a couple down from us. Close enough to act tough and show off in front of their girlfriends. Naturally, they singled out Ted and left the rest of us alone. That didn't sit well with me, and I tried to get them to stop, but it didn't work. Teenage guys in front of their girlfriends? Nothing stops them from trying to act alpha. After putting up with their nonsense for an entire game, Ted finally showed some backbone and loudly told them to shut up and leave him alone. In small-town logic, doing something like that means you're asking for trouble, because everybody knows where everybody lives. One of the hockey players taunted, "Oh, so you're gonna be a big man now? Hey guys, look at him! He thinks he's a big man now. Well, don't worry, we'll put you in your place." I stepped in and told them to just leave us alone, that nothing needed to happen because it was pointless. They backed off, and we finished our game, heading to one of our mutual friends' houses to hang out. We thought nothing of it, and I got home pretty late that night. The next morning my phone rang. It was Ted, and he was crying. He said, "They egged my house last night, the hockey guys. It's a mess." I asked him how bad it was and how he knew it was them. Ted replied, "I saw them and they shouted and taunted me. We had the windows open and some of the eggs got in there. I headed over shortly, and sure enough the house was absolutely pelted, covered with yolk marks, eggshells, you name it. Inside the house there were at least 7 or 8 direct hits. It was bad. I stuck around to help him clean it up. During the cleanup I noticed that Ted wasn't just upset anymore, he was plotting revenge. When we finished cleaning, he called a couple of his friends for ideas. He knew he couldn't get everyone back, but he could at least target the one who seemed to lead the charge. Being in Wisconsin, one thing teenagers liked to do besides drink illegally was chew tobacco. Ted had a couple of friends who chewed, and, being less than tidy, had some bottles of spit and other stuff lying around. He asked them to bring whatever they could. Before they arrived, he went and bought a couple dozen eggs. I assumed he was going to return the favor by egging the guy's house and taking it a step further. Nope, he was out to do real damage. I asked him what the plan was, and Ted said, "I'm going to get a big container and throw all of this together. Rotten eggs, chew spit, whatever else I can find." I nearly gagged just thinking about it and said, "Wow, that's pretty intense. Are you going to throw it at the guy's house?" Ted responded, "Oh no, something way better than that." He ended up combining everything into a small bucket, and there was a lot of it. It was extremely disgusting. To top it off, he left it outside in the sun to let it stew for a while. It wasn't an unusually warm spring, so leaving that outside to fester was pretty clever. He let it sit for a week, and by the time the next weekend rolled around, it smelled so foul I was gagging just thinking about it. Ted had a plan, and he was determined to see it through. His parents were trying to figure out if they could do an investigation, but with no witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. The phone calls meant nothing, and Ted figured this was his best option. Ted's plan was simple. The hockey guy had a brand new truck with a great sound system. These guys would hang out in parking lots, sitting around talking and complaining, with the truck's windows wide open, blasting music. Ted was going to get that bucket of nastiness into the cab of the truck, and he didn't care how. Unfortunately, I wasn't around to witness this. I was out of state with family that weekend, but I got a phone call from our friend who drove him to the hangout. They were lucky enough to catch the hockey guys in the parking lot, far enough from the truck for a clean shot. They pulled up alongside the truck, and Ted popped out, launched the contents of the bucket into the cab through the window, and got back in the car before they could reach him. While on the phone with the getaway driver, I could hear Ted laughing so hard in the background he was hyperventilating. I was worried he'd get in major trouble, but he didn't care. He was on cloud 9. He had reached his breaking point and was basking in the glory of his revenge. I got back to school on Monday, and it was the talk of the school. The truck's interior was completely ruined and smelled awful. The guy couldn't even drive it because Ted had managed a surgical strike, dousing just about everything, then chucking the bucket in upside down to ensure it all got in there. Ted had become a legend. He was concerned he'd get in trouble because of this, and truth be told, I think everyone expected it. However, it didn't happen. Word had reached the higher-ups at school. My town was very much an old-school place where an eye for an eye still meant something. The two of them were brought into a meeting and told not to speak to each other. As for the damages, both sets of parents were informed of what was shared in the meeting, where each kid admitted to their actions. The parents were asked to handle their children's discipline and work out the issue of damages. They ended up agreeing to just handle their own problems and leave it at that. No one bothered Ted after that. The hockey guy's truck became known as the Spit Cup truck, which annoyed them to no end. Ted never really became a popular kid in high school, but no one dared mess with him after that. And that, my friends, is a dish of revenge served ice cold. I don't know, OP, I'd have to disagree and say that this dish was served lukewarm. That's absolutely disgusting. I love this revenge story, even if it's a bit on the grosser side. It goes to show that everyone has a breaking point. I can't even imagine what that smelled like. Chewing tobacco spit, rotten eggs, and who knows what else he threw in there. I wouldn't want that dumped in my car. This story is titled, Boss Slammed Me in a Door, So I Ended His Business. This story happened about 7 to 8 years ago. I was working in a small cafe, which was owned by a young woman in her mid-20s. She was a lot of fun to work with, and I put my best foot forward. The cafe had a great sense of community. Almost every customer was a regular. It was in a small town near many car and boat repair shops, and directly next to us was a family-owned business. They were very religious and very kind. I loved the environment here and the customers. It was a regular thing to be given flowers and little gifts like that. Anyway, my boss didn't really have a desire to run the cafe. Business was great, but it took up a lot of her time, and she was young and didn't want to be tethered to it. She sold it pretty easily, and a new owner, a big guy we'll call Albert, was gregarious, laughed a lot, and told jokes. He wanted me to stay on, as I knew how to run the place and how to make all the sandwiches and so forth. I thought this would be great, even if I would miss my old boss. The first day with Albert, he was immediately impatient with me. I couldn't do anything fast enough, and he hated the way I prepared food. Usually one person ran the till and took orders, while the other prepared said orders. It was a fast process with me and my old boss, but with Albert he messed up every time and blamed my way of writing out orders. I started writing everything out. Chicken on focaccia, tomato, lettuce, sun-dried pesto spread. He would still manage to mess it up. He accused me of undermining him and finally of sabotaging him. During close-up, he would berate me further. I started dreading coming to work, which was too bad because he had me working every day but one. His wife was frequently there helping out, and she was always friendly and funny and liked me. Albert didn't treat me any better when she was around. He snapped at me a lot in front of our customers, and a few customers had even pulled me aside to talk to me about it. One day, maybe after a month of this, I couldn't take it anymore. He called me a dumb jerk for some reason or another, and the why wasn't what mattered to me. Up until this point, he talked to me like I was an idiot but hadn't actually called me a name. After he called me a dumb jerk, I said, "I'm not your wife. You don't get to talk to me like that." He flipped out. He grabbed me by the apron and dragged me toward the back door, yelling at me to get out, saying, "Who do you think you are?" and so on. I shouted for him to get his hands off me. While I was struggling to get my apron off, he shoved me outside. He still had a hold of the apron, then let go just as he stepped back and tried to slam the steel door. My leg was still inside, and the moment he realized that, he slammed it on me. My leg was caught, and I screamed and fell back. He knew he had gone too far. I was shaking with adrenaline and crying some, but more than anything else, I was furious. I got up from the ground, and the father of the family business next door had heard me shout and met me as I circled around to the front. I wasn't really that badly hurt at the time because I was crying, shaking, and full of adrenaline, but he immediately assumed it was much worse than it was. He put his arms around me and wanted me to come into his store. I saw Albert watching us through the front window of the cafe. I laid it on thick. I cried harder. I told the dad what happened in big, gulping sobs. I held my leg and told the owner that Albert was a horrible boss who treated us like garbage, and that him slamming the door on my leg was only the tip of the iceberg. It was overall pretty pathetic, but Albert saw the whole thing. After that performance, I went right home. I contacted my old boss before anything else. She still had to deal with this guy, and I didn't want to cause trouble for her. She had pretty much finished up her business with him, save for a few details, and told me that he had gotten belligerent with her on one occasion in a way that put her hackles up. She didn't like the idea of me contacting the cops, but since I didn't see a way it would impact her at this point, that's exactly what I did. The cops gave me a few courses of action. I could press charges, but I was pretty young and now unemployed, so I didn't really want to do that. Alternatively, the cops would go have a long heart-to-heart with him. I thought that was a pretty good start. They took pictures of the bruising on my leg. I bruise easily, and it looked like a mess for maybe a month or so. A couple of days later, Albert started texting me like crazy. He wanted to meet me to give me my last check. I told him he could mail it. He refused and kept insisting that I come to the cafe in the morning before opening so we could talk. This back and forth went on way too long, so I cut him off and told him to mail it to me, or I'd come by with the cops during rush to get it. After I got my check, I decided that I wanted my record of employment. There was no reason I needed it at the time, but I just wanted it. I hounded him for days until he sent me one. It had correction fluid on it, and that's not allowed. I hounded him yet again until I got the replacement. I had already found another job at this point and just wanted to needle him. 2 weeks after the incident in the doorway, I went back to the neighborhood and stopped by the garages and shops to say hello to everyone. They were glad to see me and wondered where I went and how I was doing, as Albert had told them I quit to go work elsewhere. They mentioned the cafe had been pretty slow lately. It turned out the dad from the business next door had mentioned what happened to a few people already. So I shared my side of the story with everyone. I told the story and really dragged it out, making them feel bad for me again. It's pathetic, I know. I stopped in each shop to say hello and asked if they had heard the story of what Albert did and if they wanted to see the bad bruise on my leg. I told them a story about how Big Bad Albert was hurting employees on the job. Maybe 6 months later, I took a wander to check on the cafe and say hi to the guys. It was always tucked back away from the main road, so nobody driving by would notice it and think to come in. The local businesses around it were its lifeblood. Without that, Albert had to close the cafe down pretty fast, as everyone had stopped going. In a small way, it was sad to see it closed, dark, and empty. I had a lot of fun there, and closing the cafe and moving on to another job basically meant I lost contact with all the guys. I think if I hadn't lit the fire, Albert would have eventually ended up killing the place anyway. Folks, OP could have easily turned this revenge into a nuclear one. I know in the post that OP said he didn't want to press charges due to being young and having no money, but all I can say is, if my child went to work and his or her boss slammed their leg in that door, causing that massive bruising and the cops were involved, folks, it's time to grab a lawyer. I'm taking everything that man has because I'm relentless. This story is titled, You Threatened My Job, I Took Yours. This happened last year. I was about 6 months into a food service job at the time. I worked in my university's cafeteria, prepping and serving food to the students. After closing, I took about 45 minutes to finish cleaning out my station and took another 10 minutes to finish up one of my coworkers' sections that she needed a bit of help with. My supervisor had just left after closing to who knows where, leaving the rest of us to our devices, as he usually did. He was the more watching from afar type. After I finished, I took a quick 5-minute trip to the bathroom, as I usually did around this time every day. As I happily walked back to assisting and helping others to finish so we could leave, I heard a cough behind me, the sound of the calm before the storm. I ignored it, thinking nothing of it, and went on my way. Then I heard a more abrupt cough, and I stopped and turned on my heel to meet the shift supervisor's cold gaze. His hands were crossed over his puffed chest in his regal stance. I gave him a questioning look as he looked on, expecting me to read his mind. The supervisor said, "A half an hour?" Calmly but with a sour tinge to his tone. Confused, I chuckled and said, "Oh, what?" This was apparently the worst thing I could have done. The supervisor said, "You were in the bathroom for half an hour." I was taken aback as he had never come at me with a sideways tone before. I thought we were cool, but I should have known better, seeing how he treated my coworkers. I was so shocked that I just stood there, staring at him like he grew 3 horns. I didn't feel the need to defend myself in the moment, as I knew the words he was spitting my way were pure nonsense. I was only in there for 10 minutes. Max, he then said, "Do you like your job?" I did not, in fact, like my job. I had trouble holding back my smile at this thought, as he yelled some more things that I don't remember, as my ears had gone numb to his screeching at this point. I knew he had no power to fire me, and I hadn't even seen his face for the past hour. I knew his words had no consequence. I had nothing to say to his tantrum, and as soon as he realized that, he dismissed me. I have a big problem with egging people on when they're being so irrational, so generally, I try to stay quiet at the workplace to not cause any more problems. I quickly went back to my work and started scheming about how I could get back at this man. Over the next week, I compiled photo evidence of him slacking on the job, serving undercooked food, and statements from my coworkers about their individual experiences where he ridiculed them or threatened them. I took it straight to my boss that Friday. I laid out all my evidence and my personal encounter, which they would be able to check the cameras and identify both of our whereabouts that day, and could truly see who was off duty for half an hour. I didn't think much would come of it, as I was relatively a new worker, and honestly, I didn't care about anything that happened to that place. I let it slip from my mind for the weekend. The next Monday I came in before most and started setting up. After a while, the general manager came out the back with the supervisor following her like a puppy staring at his feet. He walked sheepishly up to me and invited me to sit down with him at one of the tables in the cafeteria, where he admitted to me that he was in the wrong. He shouldn't have yelled at me like that, and he should be a better leader and was super sorry. All that usual talk. I sat there with the biggest grin on my face as he practically groveled at my feet, begging for forgiveness as his boss watched on. This man, who sat so high on his horse for the past 6 months, had been broken down. I watched on in celebration as he then apologized to each of my co-workers individually. Not a week later, he was demoted to a backroom cook, and I had been given the role of shift supervisor, as I had prior experience. We never had a problem after that, and he was generally an okay guy. I hope he really did learn his lesson, and didn't say all those things just to get it over with. Either way, this was the sweetest revenge of my life. I have since quit that job and worked for a company with people who actually know how to respect others as individuals, whether their position is below or above their own. OP's boss is a great person. You guys know how many managers or people higher up out there don't take employee complaints very seriously, especially from a new employee? Good on her for realizing that the supervisor was on a mad power trip and not doing their job properly and stepping in before it got out of hand. Also, how the heck did the supervisor keep getting away with serving undercooked food? What kind of place is this? Here's my take on these stories. Story 1. Costing a timeshare scam all their sales and making $5,000 doing it. I find JB's story both hilarious and inspiring. His boldness in calling out the timeshare scam was a masterclass in standing up to deceit. I love how he turned their own tactics against them, using their recorded calls to expose their lies. The fact that he rallied a crowd with a Braveheart-style speech is pure gold. Talk about charisma. Getting a premium cruise upgrade and $5,000 while tanking their sales? That's next-level revenge. I've never dealt with timeshares myself, but JB's story confirms my suspicions about their shady nature. It's a reminder to always read the fine print and question too good to be true offers. Has anyone actually had a positive timeshare experience? I'm skeptical but curious. Story 2. Never egg the quiet kid's house. Bad things happen. Ted's revenge is gloriously disgusting. I can't stop laughing imagining that foul bucket of rotten eggs and chew spit ruining the hockey guy's truck. It's a perfect example of the quiet kid snapping back with precision. I admire Ted's restraint in targeting just the ringleader, strategic and effective. The Spit Cup truck nickname is the cherry on top. Small towns sure know how to make a legend. I feel for Ted, dealing with bullies, but his cleverness in letting the mixture fester for a week? Genius. The school's eye for an eye approach feels fair, though I'd worry about escalating pranks. That smell must have been horrific. I'm gagging just thinking about it. Story 3. Boss slammed me in a door, so I ended his business. This story hits hard. Albert's behavior was unacceptable, and I'm furious just reading about him slamming the door on the narrator's leg. I respect the narrator's restraint in not pressing charges, though I'd have been tempted to go nuclear, like the op suggests. Their strategy of spreading the word among the local businesses was brilliant, hitting Albert where it hurt most, his customer base. I feel a pang of sadness for the cafe's closure, losing that community vibe, but Albert brought it on himself. The way the narrator played up the drama to the neighbor was a smart move, turning a personal grievance into a community stand. Justice served, small town style. Story 4. You threatened my job, I took yours. I'm cheering for the narrator here. The supervisor's power trip was infuriating, especially accusing them of a half-hour bathroom break. Ridiculous. I love how they quietly gathered evidence, from photos to co-worker statements, and took it straight to the top. The supervisor's groveling apology must have been so satisfying, and getting his job? That's poetic justice. I'm impressed by the general manager's swift action. Too many bosses ignore new employees' complaints. The fact that the supervisor was serving undercooked food is alarming. How was that overlooked? This story shows the power of staying calm, collecting proof, and striking back strategically. Sweet revenge indeed. And that wraps up another episode of our ProRevenge channel. If you guys enjoyed that story, hit the thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future revenge stories. And I'll see you guys in the next one.